Man, this channel's getting pretty lonely. If only I had someone to collaborate with. Macintyre? What's that, some kind of cheese or something? Let's check out this.
Patriarch of Hyrule.
Oh
What
my
are
God.
her true intentions? Across her
that
many
voice.
incarnations, her actions have shaped the events of Hyrule.
Ah, the Forest Temple. The juxtaposed calming greenery and dark surroundings causes a constant feeling of unease, yet intrigue, all throughout the dungeon. Plus, who could forget this temple's iconic music? It's a perfect transition from the world of starter pack-sized dungeons to the deluxe edition temples, so to speak. And what better way to get the ball rolling than with this mysterious plant-invaded temple? And of course, there was no bigger shock than this temple's final boss, Ganondorf, on his horse from Link's Nightmare.
After a trippy battle that would put Boo's mansion to shame, we learned that this enemy was merely a phantom, and apparently a pretty useless one at that. Because soon after the battle, Ganondorf said it was a worthless creation, and he'll banish it to the gap between dimensions.
Now hold on a minute here. The gap between dimensions? What is that? Throughout all of the Legend of Zelda series, let alone Ocarina of Time, this place is only ever mentioned once, here in the Forest Temple. This isn't some coincidence or translation bug either. The original phrase in Japanese maintains its full shoutout from Ganondorf as well. If we want to be smart about this, we have to be honest with ourselves. Is the phrase gap between dimensions simply just an expression, or is there an actual place Ganondorf referred to as the gap between dimensions? To be fair, let's take a look at both possibilities.
As just a phrase, many would look at this quote and think it's akin to saying "I'll send it to hell" or "oblivion" or something to that effect. Merely an angry remark, really meaning Ganondorf will simply destroy Phantom Ganon. One example that supports a more figurative interpretation like this is the German localization of the game, where Ganondorf says he'll send Phantom Ganon to Hades instead of any dimensional gap. The lack of faithfulness to the term gap between dimensions, and opting for the idea of Hades, meaning underworld, shows not only support for the phrase's figurative interpretation, but takes away some of the meaning from the gap between dimensions. If it was a real place, shouldn't that translation be preserved? Why would the translators choose a word that doesn't hold the same meaning as the original phrase?
Although this simpler interpretation makes sense, a more literal approach is not just more interesting, but also ends up being more accurate. Plus, using changes in translation as a counterargument isn't necessarily the most resilient point, considering a secondhand translation doesn't change the meaning of the original copy of the game in Japanese, of which we theorize on now. After looking into pros and cons, we can definitively point to a real gap between dimensions existing within the Legend of Zelda's universe. Here's why.
Phantom Ganon's boss fight itself supports the notion of a gap between dimensions. After all, the Phantom is able to jump between paintings in the wall and ride them through as if they were their own worlds. This is not the gap between dimensions, but it supports the idea of traveling between different worlds within the Legend of Zelda being a prevalent topic. Additionally, in an unused snippet of text found within the game's code, Saria mentions in regards to awakening as a sage, a gap between dreams and reality. With the same word being used previously, naturally it's unfair to use non-produced text as evidence, and even if it were, it probably has nothing to do with the gap between dimensions Ganondorf speaks of. However, it gives way to the many dimensions mentality of the Zelda universe.
Even just Ocarina of Time itself is very particular about the different realms within the game, such as the Temple of Light, or the Sacred Realm, or the Door of Time. Outside of this game then, there's Lorule, the Dark World, Termina, the Twilight Realm, the Silent Realm, and after that I'm still probably missing a few. There are subtle differences, but important ones nonetheless, and this sensitivity to many different worlds raises importance to the gap between dimensions. It is a concrete concept, not just some wishy-washy expression. As a blanket statement, many believe that the gap between dimensions is simply the gap between all of these worlds. Clearly, there must be some kind of interstice between them, as seen through mediums such as the Twilight Mirror or the transit between Lorule and Hyrule. In reference to Ganondorf, however, we can pinpoint specifically what dimensions the gap is between.
Within the Forest Temple, where the Phantom was fought, there is a spiral hallway that loops as Link walks through it. This changes the order in its connected room, putting walls on ceilings and vice versa. In Majora's Mask, set in Termina, a parallel world, there is a distinct entrance and exit when traveling between the woods and Termina. The beginning starts with a weird trip down a giant pit, and at the end of it there's a spiral hallway just like the one in the Forest Temple.
Hold on, wait a second there. Out of all the choices for room decor, the developers opt for the same style of hallway seen in the Forest Temple. That is not a coincidence. Termina is a parallel world. That's not some fan theory or a general idea, it's been confirmed multiple times. As Link travels between worlds, his final departure into Termina is signified by this twisty hallway, an homage back to the Forest Temple. Whether or not Ganondorf knew it, he was referencing the gap between Hyrule and Termina. The joint symbolism between the hallways of Termina and the Forest Temple share a strong bond, with an eerie sense of foreshadow looming over Link as he wades through his first adventure as an adult in the Forest Temple. In an almost stronger hint, Phantom Ganon is fought again in the Wind Waker. Etched on his sword this time, when translated, are the words Zubora Gabora, which are actually names of the mountain smiths from Majora's Mask and Snowhead. Why would the smiths' names be on the sword, unless they had worked on it personally? And if they did in fact, then it means Phantom Ganon was in Termina. Thus, once banished, the Phantom could only possibly have been between Hyrule and Termina.
For those two distinct Terminian characters to have their signatures on Phantom Ganon's sword is a big deal. Not only could this mean that Phantom Ganon was in Termina, but somehow he also made it to the Great Sea as well. For this to happen, Termina must have existed somewhere on the adult timeline as well, between Ocarina of Time and the Wind Waker. Although we don't know too much about the flood and its surrounding events, the world of Termina must have still existed in this era as well. An alternate analysis could be that Phantom Ganon is somehow able to jump between two different timelines. If Termina doesn't exist outside of the child timeline, then perhaps Phantom Ganon traveled through time and not just different worlds.
Now, both of those possibilities are valid. However, I want to focus on that second interpretation specifically. We know where the gap between dimensions likely is now, after looking at all the hints and evidence that points to it. But where we find the evidence is pretty strange. It's across different games and even different timelines as seen in the Wind Waker. So it might just mean, after all, that Ganondorf's gap between dimensions is not just the space between worlds, but perhaps the space between time as well. A fourth dimensional gap, as it were. The topic that has such little information surrounding it and is shrouded in mystery might just mean a lot more than anyone realized. This could mean that Ganondorf had the power to transport his phantom between worlds and maybe even different realities as well. The very glue that binds these worlds together might be part of the key to unlocking some of the biggest secrets in the franchise. For example, how could Ganondorf get the Triforce of Power in Twilight Princess? And how does Demise's hatred reincarnate throughout all of the Zelda games? When we read between the lines of other various dimensions, we might just excavate the solution in the gap between after all. Thanks for watching. I'd like to give a big shout out to Macintyre for helping me make this video. He contributed lots of cool ideas and makes similar videos regularly on his channel. If you like clever theories and news on the Zelda series and other video games as well, on top of his voice that's smooth as butter, then be sure to check out Macintyre's channel and the video we collaborated on here. With that being said, there's new videos every week here on Nullatrum as well, so if you enjoyed, please subscribe and leave a like. Since you made it this far, you definitely should check out my analysis on the character of Ganondorf, and how the 3 games he appears in each reveal a little something different about his character. There's also another really interesting video about an old fan site that hunted for the Triforce in Ocarina of Time, called The Odyssey of Hyrule. I'm sure you'll enjoy either video, and outside of that there's tons of content on my channel, so be sure to stick around. Again, thanks to Macintyre for helping me make this video. Please subscribe to both of our channels, and have a great day.